Hello, good afternoon. My name is Tenzin Namdul. I am Tibetan American Foundation President. So as you can notice, this auditorium is full of a noise. That's good, right? And I want to talk to you guys briefly about this performance or the musical group. This is a part of Tibetan American Foundation musical group. For the last 1.5 years, every weekdays, they have been putting a lot of hard work. So as you will see, there are two main instruments, and this is kind of a tongue twister, so you guys can say it with me. One is a Tibetan guitar. This is a 3-string guitar, and we usually call it damnyen. And the second one is, as you can see, a couple of kids who are in the sitting position, that's called hammer dulcimer. Say it together with me, hammer dulcimer. This is kind of tongue twister, I know. So we are delighted to announce that these about 30 students led by the musical instrument teacher, Gengen Dala, are going to perform or sing or perform 5 special songs. So these songs are meant to honor or to play tribute to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. These heartfelt performances are dedicated to expressing deep gratitude for his appointment, celebrating his extraordinary life, and this year he'll be turning 90th. So we will have a big 90th celebration in Asanti on July 6th. Everybody is welcome to attend there. We have a big a hall. So through music and in tradition, these students aim to convey the collective love and reverence of Tibetan community for spiritual leader. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Virajita Singh, and I'm the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. That wonderful performance that we just heard was by the students of Tapham's Cultural School. Thank you again for a beautiful start to our program. Thank you all for attending today's event. MIA is deeply honored to be part of a community that celebrates its rich and diverse cultural heritage. One significant example of our connection to the Tibetan is our connection to the Tibetan American community in Minnesota, which, if you didn't know, is the second largest community, Tibetan community in the United States, second only to Queens, New York. We are very grateful for our partnership with Tibetan American Foundation of Minnesota, TAFM as it's called, with whom we have been partnering since August of 2023 in a number of collaborative events, of which this is one, in a year-long series called Celebrate Tibet. And you also just heard recently from Tenzin Namdul, the current president of TAFM. So if you're not already familiar with the Tibetan American Foundation of Minnesota, since its founding in 1992, TAFM has become a key cultural and social hub, offering a space to preserve Tibetan identity, culture, and traditions through its Community Cultural Center in St. Paul. And for more than a year, as I said, we've been partnering with them on a series of programs honoring the rich Tibetan cultural heritage and the community that now calls Minnesota home. Before the program begins and I introduce our Chief Curator and Deputy Director, Matthew Welch, I wanted to alert you that in today's program, there may be some images related to death and dying that you may find disturbing, but it is really important to the presentation of this topic. To begin our program today, I'd like to introduce the person responsible for working with Alice Kandell, a collector, to bring the resplendent Tibetan shrine to MIA, and that is Dr. Matthew Welch. Matthew serves as the Mary Ingebrand Pollard Deputy Director and Chief Curator. By training, he's a specialist in Japanese art and Zen Buddhist painting, but it is fair to say that he's responsible for the phenomenal growth of the Asian collections here at MIA, with the Kandell Shrine being but the latest in a series of accomplishments. Without further ado, I will pass the microphone to Matthew to help us contextualize the Tibetan Buddhist Shrine Room in the framework of today's topic, death, dying, and resilience in Tibetan, from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective. Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you, Virajita, for that introduction. I know how difficult it is with our long winters for you all to opt into spending an afternoon in a dark auditorium to discuss death. But as I was making my way to the museum this afternoon, I passed beneath a gigantic crabapple tree, and its blossoms were being spread on the ground beneath it. And it brought to mind the Japanese use of cherry blossoms as a metaphor for the transience of life. So in some ways, in this season, just at this time, there is some logic to being here with us today, but we thank you for that. So before I begin my presentation, I'd like to introduce two very special guests that we have with us today. The one that you see on your left then is Drupa Rinpoche, who is a Tibetan Buddhist monk who holds a monastic geshe degree in Buddhist philosophy, a Bachelor of Psychology and a Master's in Science of Positive Psychology from the Higher Education Learning Philosophy University, so-called HELP, in Kuala Lumpur, and Life University in Marietta, Georgia. He is the founder of Drupa Monastery, Oasis of Dharma in St. Paul, and the resident teacher at the Kachöling Dharma Center in Minneapolis. Drupa Rinpoche has worked as a researcher at the University of Minnesota's School of Public Health, and he is a volunteer at the Buddhist chaplain at the Hennepin County Medical Center. And so he'll be joining me on stage in a bit. Also with us today is Dr. Tenzin Namdul, who is a medical anthropologist and a Tibetan medicine doctor. He is an assistant professor and director of the Tibetan Healing Initiative at the University of Minnesota's Center for Spirituality and Healing. He is also an affiliate faculty member at the University of Minnesota's Asian American Studies program, and together with Dr. Miriam Cameron, he is a co-author of, and I have it here, Tibetan Medicine in You, A Path to Well-Being, Better Health, and Joy. We have copies available of this remarkable publication, and following today's presentation, there'll be a book signing in the Regis Court just outside of the auditorium. So by way of reminder, the Tibetan shrine that is now a permanent display here at the museum is a gift of Dr. Alice Kandell. We unveiled the shrine on September 14th of last year, and in commemoration of this remarkable gift to the museum, we've been hosting a variety of programmings in partnership with TAFM, as Virajita mentioned, designed to give us a greater insight into the shrine and to Tibetan Buddhism in general. Alice Kandell is a Harvard-trained child psychologist who lives and works in New York. She was first exposed to Tibetan culture in 1965 when she attended the coronation of the Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Sikkim, who happened to marry Alice's friend and college classmate, the American Hope Cook. Alice traveled to Sikkim, neighboring Nepal, and India several times in the following years, following the coronation, and was even asked by the then King of Sikkim to document the country's culture, from family farms to religious events to life within the royal palace. Alice's photographs were published in this country by Time Life and Redbook, and her entire archive of some 15,000 photographs are now in the Library of Congress. Over the ensuing decades, Alice became a passionate collector of Tibetan ritual objects that came onto the market in the United States, vowing to keep and display them in a respectful manner akin to the shrines and monasteries she visited on her journeys to Sikkim and neighboring countries. By 2010, her collection had grown to such a degree that she donated over 200 objects to the National Museum of Asian Art in Washington, D.C. for the establishment of a Tibetan shrine within their galleries. On that occasion, His Holiness expressed his appreciation for her dedication to preserving Tibetan art and culture and for sharing it with the broader public. In 2019, she visited us here at MIA, but also met with representatives from TAFM and the Gyuto Wheel of the Dharma Monastery. She was impressed with MIA and its long commitment to Asian art, but she was also struck by the sizable Tibetan community here in Minnesota and the warm welcome that she received when meeting with representatives from TAFM and from the monastery. By 2023, she had decided to give her second shrine to a public institution. This time, that institution is MIA. And as you know, the shrine was unveiled last September. So, what is a Tibetan shrine? And I think that as I look at this audience, I think I have to apologize. This is redundant for most of you, but I'll go quickly through this as a kind of background or setting. Our first speaker in our series of the Year of Tibet was Dr. Thupten Jinpa, a scholar of religious studies who also happens to have been the Dalai Lama's principal translator for many years. Dr. Jinpa explained that shrines possess three vital elements: painted and sculptural images of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Lamas that represent the enlightened body, that is, the physical body of an individual who has achieved enlightenment or a high state of spiritual awareness. The bodies are not physically altered or transformed in any literal way, but rather they reflect the individual's inner state of enlightenment, such as an increased awareness, a pervasive calm, and a transformed relationship with suffering. Enlightened speech, on the other hand, within the context of a shrine, is often represented by sutras or canonical scriptures, thought to represent both the Buddha's teachings as well as the commentaries of succeeding great masters. The recitation of these holy writings is believed to connect individuals with the Buddha's wisdom and to facilitate their own path to enlightenment. Shrines also contain choten, or stupa, a kind of sacred monument that symbolizes the enlightened mind of the Buddha and the path to enlightenment. Chorten are a reference to the architectural stupas created throughout northern India by King Ashoka in the 3rd century before the Christian era to hold the relics of the Buddha. In fact, stupas in Chorten enshrine relics, scriptures, and the remains of revered teachers, and their architectural details reflect certain metaphysical principles of Buddhism. In this example, the discs above the base represent the stages of enlightenment, while the crescent moon and the sun on top symbolize the dissolution of opposites, a critical aspect of wisdom. Thus, these interconnected components denote the physical actions, verbal expressions, and mental states, elements that are essential for spiritual growth. Their presence indicates a sacred space, even though in the case of a domestic shrine, it is located within the mundane setting of a private home. In addition to representations of enlightened beings in the form of sculpted and painted images, sutras, and chorten, shrines are often outfitted with fantastically painted and carved furniture and architectural elements, colorful ceiling and wall hangings fashioned from precious fragments of silk, and finely woven wool carpets. Through these representations and decorations, the shrine is made to be markedly different from daily life and suggests the resplendent abodes of enlightened beings and powerful protectors. It is within this context that the mundane world is left behind by the Buddhist practitioner, where they find a place of refuge, quiet, and beauty, a reminder of a higher realm of existence towards which to strive. By far the most common and frequent use of a domestic shrine is to make daily offerings of food, drink, flowers, and incense. This is an essential form of devotional worship and spiritual merit making. Among the many virtues extolled by Buddhist literature, none is mentioned more frequently than generosity. And in the case of a shrine, generosity is manifest through the practice of daily offerings. Generosity and giving is what propels the bodhisattva along the long path to Buddhahood, and the practice of making offerings cultivates generosity and demonstrates the lack of attachment to the fleeting riches of this world, virtues that those traveling the path to enlightenment must perfect. There are various types of offerings usually made as part of morning ritual and that are disassembled in the evening. These include fragrant incense and flowers for a sense of smell, white scarves for a sense of touch, butter lamps and mirrors to light the way and to provide sight, foods such as rice, barley, and fruit, or their stand-ins in the form of torma made as offerings, water for drinking, water for ablutions, and chanting of sacred syllables with or without music is also an offering, an auditory one used to please the deities and protectors and to invoke them, and to invoke their presence. While daily offerings represent an ongoing expression of generosity, so too is the commissioning of sculptural images, painted tankas, fine silk hangings, carved and painted furniture, and finely wrought ritual implements. A shrine can be simple, but another expression of generosity and a powerful act to cultivate positive karma and merit is to commission such objects and add them to the shrine for the benefit of the family, for the benefit of the community, and for the benefit of sentient beings everywhere. Thus, shrines often represent efforts of generations who have added treasures over time as aids of meditation, spiritual refinement, and reminders of the wisdom of the great teachers. While shrines are special places of refuge and resplendence, for spiritual cultivation, they are also the location of numerous observances that make up the Tibetan spiritual calendar. Some observances occur on an annual basis and are based on significant historic dates. Sagadawa is celebrated on the 15th day of the 4th lunar month and commemorates Shakyamuni's birth, enlightenment, and parinirvana. And there are several images within the shrine that speak to these celebrations. For example, the birth of the Buddha is represented in this tanka. So here Queen Maya reaches up to hold the branch of the sala tree, and Shakyamuni emerges immaculately from her side. Interestingly, in this case, emerges as a gilded image, not quite as a human-looking baby. But this is probably from a set that would have recorded significant events in the life of the historic sage. It's true of this image, the main image of the shrine, also representing Shakyamuni at the moment he attains enlightenment, where he's beset upon by a host of demons that try and distract him from his concentration, and he reaches down and touches the earth to call it to witness. Chokor Duchen is celebrated on the 4th day of the 6th month and commemorates Shakyamuni's first sermon delivered at Sarnath in northern India, revered evermore as the turning of the wheel of the Dharma. This event is considered the founding moment of Buddhist teachings and the Buddhist community. Sarnath derives from the Sanskrit word Saranganatha, which translates Lord of the Deer. The name refers to an ancient Buddhist legend in which a bodhisattva was in the form of a deer and stepped in front of the arrow of a king in order to protect a doe. And so this pivotal moment represents that kind of selfless compassion that is so implicit in Buddhism. And so often the turning of the wheel of the law, represented by the wheel in the center here, is flanked by 2 deer that kneel in honor of the Buddha's teachings. And I think you'll see this in the shrine in sculptural form, but often it occurs above the gateway and doorways as an entrance to Tibetan monasteries. Certainly not all dates on the spiritual calendar relate to the historic sage. The 8th day of each lunar month is believed to be auspicious for making offerings to Tara, the most widely venerated female deity in Himalayan Buddhism. She is the personification of wisdom and is believed to come to the aid of beings on their quest towards enlightenment by rescuing them from physical and spiritual danger. Private shrines also house representations of notable teachers associated with the owner's spiritual lineage. Mia's shrine holds representations of Tsongkhapa, the 15th century scholar who is regarded as the founder of the Gelug sect, and to which the present Dalai Lama belongs. Lama Tsongkhapa's parinirvana is celebrated on the 25th day of the 10th lunar month, and this year that occurs on December 7th. And of course, Tibetan Buddhists, as we heard earlier, will all celebrate the Dalai Lama's 90th birthday on July 6th, when prayers and offerings will be made before photographic images of His Holiness at monasteries and private shrines throughout the world. While a private shrine such as Mia's can thus serve as the spiritual needs of the lay owners of a household, there are occasions when families call on the expertise of local lamas and priests. In Tibetan Buddhism, Homa ceremonies, also known as fire pujas or fire offerings, are typically performed by a qualified Buddhist priest or lama. These ceremonies involve making offerings into a fire, reciting mantras, and invoking deities, all within a specific ritual structure. Conducting homa is believed to cleanse and purify both the individual and the environment of negative energies. Tibetan Buddhist funeral rites, including those associated with domestic shrines, emphasize the cyclical nature of life and death, with the soul's journey to rebirth as the central focus. Domestic shrines play an ongoing and important role in the spiritual cultivation throughout one's life that culminates in death and the rebirth process. After death, the body is often kept within the shrine or just outside of its doorways for 3 to 5 days while monks perform rituals and recite the Tibetan Book of the Dead to help the soul navigate the rebirth process. The shrine is set up with the deceased's photo before which offerings are placed and prayers are recited. In some Buddhist traditions, a series of services are held in the shrine at set intervals, culminating on the 49th day after death to aid the soul's progress through the bardo, this intermediate state. And there is where I am out of my depth. So I'll stop there and invite Drupa Rinpoche to the stage. Thank you.
Tashi Delek, and good afternoon. Thank you for your presence here. So I would like to begin with the benefits of being mindful of death. And the topic of death is a taboo for many people. So I'm surprised that we have a house full here who are not afraid to talk about death. Even though generally the subject of death is considered or viewed as a taboo, something people don't want to talk about. But from the Buddhist perspective, we embrace it. We not only embrace and discuss about it, we contemplate on the topic and we meditate on the topic to bring about this conviction that things do not last. Everything in this existence are impermanent by nature. So we use this as a powerful tool to gain insight into the permanent nature of things. So for many of us, even though we live in this imperfect existence, somehow we have this unrealistic or mistaken view that our existence, our world is perfect. When things go wrong, we were shocked. When death comes, we couldn't believe, especially when what is called untimely death or sudden death occurs. We couldn't believe it's such a shock. That is because that we have this, we live in this different world, which is contrary to the reality. As you see in the picture, this is such an old car. If you are driving this kind of car, which is, let's say, 20 years old, and the car breaks down in the middle of the highway, would you be very, very disappointed? You won't. You will be saying, oh, this is the time. I'm glad, I'm happy that it ran for so many years. In contrast, if your brand new car breaks down in the middle of the highway, you will be very disappointed. The reason is that our expectation. For the old car, we expect to break down. We expect this to, sooner or later, will give us trouble. Whereas a new car, the expectation is that it shouldn't break down. So that's why if we are able to be mindful or think about that, then we will be able to cultivate resilience. When things go wrong, when death happens, we take it as part and parcel of life. Nothing to be shocked. Even great practitioners, Tibetan great practitioners, they say that instead of complaining and instead of being shocked, we should be rejoicing that it has not happened until now. Because we are, in nature, supposed to happen anytime. but it endures for such a long time. So that's why I think that if we are able to contemplate or being aware or being mindfulness of our death, then we will be able to cultivate resilience in this life. And because of that, we will be able to focus our shift. We will be able to prioritize what the things that are more meaningful. At the moment, we are really trapped in what is called the rat race. We are after fame, name, wealth, whatnot. But once we have this conviction that any time that will come, then we will be able to really focus our things and do the things that we will not regret. So some people engage in spiritual practice. So from my experience, people who come to centers, Dharma centers, when you ask them the reason why they are coming to center, you will find stories that they had some experiences of death. That's why they are now prioritizing spiritual practices over other mundane activities. So that's another point I wanted to make, that it is important if we are able to contemplate on the possibility that death can come anytime, we will be able to bring meaning to our life. And then, of course, no one can escape death. Sooner or later, we have to embrace that. The question is, how are we going to embrace death when finally it comes? So if you are able to do this, the first two things, then when the time comes, one will be able to embrace the death in a peaceful way. In Dharma texts, we say that there are three types of practitioners. Those who are in the highest level, the supreme practitioners. For them, when death comes, they joyfully accept. Because for them, it's like changing their clothes. They want to discard this old body, so they look forward to it. But for the middling practitioner, for them, there is no fear when the death comes. And for the minimum, the lowest, what you call the practitioner at the lowest level, at least they have no regret. You see in the research that at the deathbed, people have so many things that they regret. I should have done this, I should have done that. But you are now on the deathbed. There is nothing you can do except regret. So if we don't want to be one of those people, then it is time to reflect and talk more about death. And finally, this enables a better future. So from the Buddhist perspective, when we die, our bodies were disposed, but our consciousness continues. So that journey we call rebirth or next life. So if we are able to be mindful of death and if we do something about it. When I say something about it, doesn't mean to prevent death. There's no way we can prevent death. But we get ready, we get prepared. Sometimes I tell people that we are very absurd in many ways. For example, when we have to travel, when we go for outing, for one-day outing, let's say to Duluth, one-day trip, we prepare so much. We pack our car with all kinds of things. The mattress, the cushion, the food, the drink, this and that. Just for one-day trip. But here, we are going to an unknown destination. We are not prepared. We don't want to prepare. We don't want even to talk about it, let alone prepare. So, this brings to the next topic. So what determines good rebirth and bad rebirth? You see in the picture, this is Teppanyaki grill. I think many of you must have gone there. So you have tray of foods there, and then you go with your plate and you choose. And sometimes you have the vegetarian section, sometimes you have the non-vegetarian section, or even vegan, and then you decide which one I want. So that whatever you turn out, come back with a plate, is at that moment what you find, what you feel like eating at that time. You could be a non-vegetarian, but if you look at the things they have, the vegetarian section, maybe you change your mind. Oh, that looks better. I will go for the vegetarian. So you choose vegetarian ingredients and ask them to cook. So this is exactly like what happens at the time of death. What determines good rebirth and bad rebirth? Or in another word, favorable rebirth? Of course, from the Buddhist point of view, we have positive karma and we have negative karma. We have variety of both. We have countless negative karma. We have committed, we have cultivated countless virtuous deeds. So what determines, even though we have both, but what determines favorable rebirth or bad rebirth is the state of mind at the time of death. So at the time of death, if your mind is non-virtual, let's say if you have strong attachment to somebody at that time, let's say if you are so agitated and angry at that time, then that mind picks up the negative karma that you have created in your past lives. And that brings you to the unfavorable rebirth. On the other hand, if you are able to generate positive mindset at the time of death, then even though you have lived your life, this life, maybe more into negative side, but because of that positive mindset at the time of death, one will be able to bring up the positive karma that one had created in the past. And that results into favorable rebirth. So that's why what Dr. Matthew just showed, the images, help us to invoke virtuous mindset at the time of death. That's why when somebody is nearing death, our practice is to play prayers, chantings, and also have lots of holy images, so that the person who is dying can look at it and help to invoke that positive mindset, so that that can help to result in a favorable rebirth. And then we might say, well, in that case, so the main point is that maintaining a calm and positive mindset at the time of death is of most utmost importance. So we might think that in that case, it's quite easy. I don't have to work so hard all my life. Only thing I have to do is, at the time of death, I will just bring up the strong, positive, virtuous mind, and I will be okay. That's not easy. If you have no habit, if you are not accustomed to doing that, it is very difficult, especially at the time of death, when there's a lot of anxiety, when there's a lot of fear, when there's a lot of feeling of uncertainty, without any familiarity. It is very difficult, if not impossible, to invoke or generate such a virtuous mind. So therefore, we say that to die well, one must first live well. Thank you.
If you don't mind, Rinpoche, so you have the last slide showing the dissolution or the stages of dying or the process of dying. And so before I begin, I really want to give a shout out to the leadership that Dr. Viraj Singh, Dr. Matthew Welch, and the president of the TAFM and all of the board members have shown in crafting and designing this particular event. And so really, thanks so much. Rinpoche, thank you so much for setting the stage for the rest of the presentation for me. So in the next 10 minutes, I have to make an attempt to contextualize everything that we have heard and at least try to give a takeaway message how we can die well. So it might sound easy or simple sometimes, but often when we talk about death and dying, let alone contemplating on death and dying, things get a little tricky and murky here. So, as Dr. Matthew said earlier, I'm a Tibetan medicine practitioner and medical anthropologist. So kind of first study that I do is I go out to the community and live with them as an anthropologist. So I begin my work on death and dying by asking a simple question. Why in Tibetan Buddhist practice, death and dying is used as an avenue to generate resilience and cultivate compassion? Now, it might not make much sense sometimes. The image that you see here, it was in 2018, I had a chance to have a quick sitting with a young reincarnated Lama. His name is Tenzin Rinpoche. And the reason that I had this image is he played a huge role, but more than him, his predecessor played a really important role that really changed the trajectory of my academic career, because then I decided to come to the US and go back to graduate school. So this Buddhist practitioner that we see here on the image has been clinically dead for almost a week when we first had a chance to go and be with him. He was in the state of post-death or post-mortem meditation, and he was the predecessor of the young reincarnate Lama that I showed earlier. So now we'll talk a little bit about what is this post-mortem, post-death meditation. But the thing was, after almost 10 years, when I was doing my field work, because the senior monk who was in Tukdam, that was in 2008, and 2017 when I went out to do my field work for almost 2 years, I had a chance to see his reincarnate Lama being enthroned at the Drupa Rinpoche Monastery University. And that's how my journey began. For the past almost now more than 15 years now, my work has been really focused on trying to understand how we can grapple with the way a certain cultural way of engaging with death and dying, and how it becomes a cultural utility, how it becomes a cultural reference, not only for moral compass, but also in investigating the ultimate reality. So as I go through some of my following slides, as Virajita said earlier, I'll be showing some of the images as a case studies for us to look at and engage in some conversation afterwards. And these are all individuals who have given full consent to share their images and their stories with everyone. Now, what is tukdam? And I'll use this quote here. Tukdam is when practitioner uses the subtlest level of consciousness called chibe, which is the clear light state, that follows a clinical death or a biological death. A practitioner continues to meditate post-biological death, suspends the processes of rigor mortis, decomposition, maintains warmth of the body, and sometimes produces a pleasant scent. So again, really, when I first had a chance to, in 2008, go and observe and collect data from this particular practitioner that I showed earlier, it made me really rethink my whole work, my whole engagement with Tibetan Buddhist culture or Tibetan Buddhist healing practices. So one thing was sure, these community members or in this particular culture, they invest so much in engaging contemplative practice, which certainly help to have certain level of cognitive resilience, cognitive muscle, if you will, and that would translate into also having a physical resilience. So as we see, when I was at the monastery, the same building where I was staying, a senior monk who would live in that one of the small cells or rooms they have in that building, every morning I will meet with him and he would be just there sitting, just kind of using his leisure time. But little do I know at that time that he was just really contemplating. He was in his own mind lab, muscling his cognitive capacity. And as I spend more and more time, I've seen this other elderly Tibetan woman who was in early 90s, and she passed away after a few days, and she has over and over time, when I go and see her with some of my other friends or among friends, she had this certain level of cognitive, physical resilience. Despite all the pain and discomfort that she was feeling, she was always there to take your hand and try to talk to us, even though she can't really utter much of a word. So some of the cases that I want to present here today is when I first met this gentleman. He was diagnosed with advanced stage lung cancer. He has spent most of his life smoking quite heavily. And when I first met him, he was really scared. He don't want to really engage with most of the other people. Suddenly, he wasn't really talking much with his family members. And over the course of time, we were able to talk. We were able to engage in some of the conversations that he wanted to engage with, not what we want to engage with him. And over the course of time, he was able to reclaim or retain or maintain his focus, his attention, which Rinpoche was alluding to earlier. And by doing so, he was able to be grateful for where he was at that time. He was able to just kind of put enough energy and enough composure that he would kind of get up and try to interact with others, his family members. And that really say a lot in terms of what Rinpoche was saying earlier. We have different levels of kind of facing front row when you can say that you are just actively dying and how you want to die. There's a certain level that you can at least retain your focus, your cognitive attention, and then how you can use that. Now, this other case that I wanted to share with you guys, it's really, he's a senior lay person, but he's also a practitioner. When he first escaped into India from Tibet, he and his other friends were working as a road constructor on the way to Ladakh, and when they were breaking rocks, he had one of those blasts spread the pebbles on his face, and he lost his eyesight. And so most of his life he has been blind. And when he was close to dying, he suddenly had certain level of discomfort, pain every now and then. But despite all the physical sufferings that he was experiencing at that time, his love for everyone at that time was unparalleled. And every time I would go in there, and the day I went there, it was the day he died. And that morning, he wanted to make sure, even though he can't really see anything, he could hear and he could experience that I was around. And he made sure that one of the attendants would bring a tea for me. And so I would be just sitting around him and holding the cup of tea. And he was sure that what he wants when he died, he wanted one of his attendants to read a particular text, what they call is Sawan de Betsaju. It's a more nuanced level ancient Buddhist text of Tibetan Book of the Dead, and where basically it's really about trying to, even though he had spent his life studying and contemplating on different stages of dying, he wants his attendant to kind of be with there. And in that particular text is really about what you will experience as you go through all those different stages of dying, the last slide that Rinpoche has. And so it's really his love that really bind him and be able to bind him with his physical decay that's happening at that time quite rapidly, but also in his environment. And then the last one that I want to share with you guys is this particular senior Buddhist monk who was, I think, in late 80s and been diagnosed with a cancer. I don't remember exactly what kind of a cancer, but he was close to dying, and every now and then when I would go and see him, and one of his attendants would be always there. His name is Jamyang, and he always was in a state of joy. He was not only focused, he was secure, he was kind of confident about how things are going, and every now and then, whether it was even one of those, I remember Indian guy who was setting something, he managed to just kind of raise his hand and wave at him. And then when he died, he stayed in the post-death meditation that I alluded to in the beginning. He stayed in tukdam meditation for 11 days. And we don't have much time to really engage in more discussion about why they stay in tukdam, why they would invest their whole life trying to really, at the visceral level, understand different stages of dying, and then at the moment of dying, use that moment at the state of clear light or chibe ursel to continue their contemplative practice or meditation. So hopefully during the interactive discussion, we will have time to talk about it. And now the final slide is about 4 pillars and the core strength of dying well. So now kind of really bringing together everything that what earlier Matthew introduced to us, and the Rinpoche kind of walked us through some of the core recipes or components that is critical through the lens of Tibetan Buddhist practice when you think about dying well. The first thing is really, Rinpoche said it a few times, it's having an attentive state of mind, be focused, and that's really key. And doing my study in the field, I think I observed and sat with close to 170 people who were dying, and I think over and over I saw that the whole focus was on really safeguarding or protecting the dying person's consciousness, physically everything is rapidly degenerating, if I may use that word, or we are just losing everything, right? And the whole thing is really trying to safeguard the mind. And then once the person have that attentive and focused mind, then again, as Rinpoche said earlier, to kind of steer that focused mind on virtuous act. And that virtuous mind could be facilitated for some of the people. Most of the time for practitioners, it's just there. They focus on the concept of interdependent nature. And so it's really about just connecting oneself with others at the very profound and deep level, at the very extremely subtle level. And so interdependent nature, we all have started to realize more and more in this past few years, right? I mean, whatever happens in other parts of the world has direct impact on this part of our world or in our local community. And by having that connection with others, it's so much easier to cultivate love and compassion. And in doing so, once we have love and compassion, when our focus is shifted toward others, it's so much easier to generate resilience, being at peace, and in fact to be a little more joyful, just for the reason that, oh wow, like I'm not, it's just not me. It's just really my interest of being happy, being joyful is directly rooted in how I care for others and think about others. And that's really the core strength that I have realized is grounded on this, or kind of riding on these 4 different pillars, what in Tibetan Buddhist term, they call it Nyingtop. And so we don't really have a equivalent translation for that, but Nyingtop literally in Tibetan means heart power, or power of heart. And we can loosely translate it also as mental courage. And so I think that is really the key. And how do we do that? Subjectively, we can do it in different forms. But I think one of the key things that Rinpoche alluded to earlier, and I want to emphasize here, is safeguarding our mind or consciousness when things are difficult, not just only at the time of dying. So I'll leave it here. Thank you. And we look forward to engaging in interactive discussion. Thank you.
That was amazing, but also generated so many questions that we're going to spend a little bit of time doing a kind of interview, and then we'll open it up for your questions from the floor. When we do so, please note that we have microphones on either side. So before beginning your question, please wait for the microphone so that we can all hear your question. So, so many questions. So, Dr. Namdul, let me begin with you. You said that, or I guess the question is, why is death and the process of dying so important to Buddhist practitioners?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Matthew. So, well, again, I want to thank all of you for hanging in there. We have been talking about death and dying this past hour or a little more. And so one of the reasons that I want to reinforce my gratitude to all of you is really, it's so critical, not only for these Buddhist practitioners that I studied, but also people in general to really understand what will happen when we're dying, right? So I think some of you have heard about it, the University of Minnesota. I think they have a death lab now where someone can go in and simulate a situation when you have been told that you are diagnosed with a terminal illness and now you're going to do this and you have to go and see your physician, and it just kind of will walk you through as you're dying, right? And it sometimes for some people is a little intimidating, but most of the people, they are really appreciating the way they're able to work through their own kind of a prepping for if something like that happened. And what Tibetan Buddhist practice or theory does is take it from there. So when we are going through the last stages of dying, when someone is actively dying, in most of the ancient concept and philosophy or psychology, we talk about 4 or 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space, right? And on the last slide that Rinpoche has, it has really these 8 elaborated stages. What is happening is, when we are going through these stages, we are slowly suspending or shutting down our sensory consciousness, similar to when we are getting into a deep state of sleep. And one thing which is really, I think, is beautiful today is what Matthew said earlier about all these different rituals or cultural, religious artifacts that are there in the shrine room. Those are actually really to engage with your sensory consciousness. When we listen to our young musical team here, when they were performing music, what it really did for us was to really kind of work with our hearing consciousness. It helps us to just calm down and relax a little bit. And the process of dying, or the stages of dying, is really what these practitioners are trying to do. That as these different stages of different elements are slowing down and different sensory consciousness are dimming down, and they get to a stage where it's almost clear, without any kind of distraction. What they say is a subtle consciousness, and some of these practitioners are even able to go deeper into an extremely subtle consciousness, and thereby they use that clear state of mind to engage in, as I said before in the beginning, how come that in this particular culture, these practitioners would that as an avenue to study or investigate the reality of our life. And that's when they come to a stage where their mind is undivided, their attention is undivided, because all the sensory consciousness are almost dimmed and suspended. The only thing they have is a core, extremely subtle consciousness. So this is a little long-winded response, Matthew, but that's why I think for them, it really, and so it's not only at the time of stages of dying, and I'm sure Rinpoche can respond to that much better than me, but even during the course of their when they're alive, they would simulate the similar process of dimming down the sensory consciousness. I guess in a layperson's term, we can say that taking away all the noises, and then gradually getting to a point where anything that you focus on, you're able to grasp it at the deepest level. Thank you.
Thank you. Brings to mind my dissertation research and a Zen priest that I researched, advising his pupils to do whatever you do, to do it completely. So, sort of excluding the distractions that would impede whatever it is that you're doing, and certainly it would apply to the rituals of death and dying. So Rinpoche, I wonder if you would elaborate on what you mean by living well and dying well.
That's a very, very good question. And first, I would like to add a little bit about this, the clear light. So, in Buddhism, one of the main practice, especially when we talk about the Tantrayana practice, so main goal is actually trying to bring that clear light mind. So clear light mind, simply put, it is the most subtlest mind. So those who were here before the actual performance, when the performers were rehearsing, so a lot of clutter, a lot of noise. So if we are to focus on something, no way, there's a lot of distraction. So it is said that the most subtlest mind is the most powerful mind. So if we are able to utilize that subtlest mind on meditation, then that bears such an enormous result. Using this subtle mind for even 5 minutes is much more powerful than doing that for your whole lifetime. So that's why Tibetan Tantra practice is all about bringing that up. So what happens is, it is not easy when you are alive. Only when those who reach certain level of realization, they are able to utilize that subtlest mind. So for us, for ordinary people, so we try to substitute that because we don't have enough practice to bring about that subtlest minds. So we are trying to use our death. So in order, so because when we die, everybody goes through these 8 stages, and everybody goes through this stage, the clear light mind stage. But the problem is, most of us do not realize, do not recognize when that emerges. So the main practice is to visualize that repeatedly, imagining that, okay, now the earth element dissolves into wind element. I can see these signs. These signs suggest that I'm now in this stage. So you go through this, meditate on this repeatedly so many times with a hope, with a view that when actual death comes, you will be able to recognize each stages and then seize that moment. So, okay, next one is clear light stage. This is the time I must seize my opportunity. So then realizing, recognizing that subtle mind, you focus on the meditation. You meditate on a particular object. That's how we try to utilize. That's the whole point of focusing on this clear light meditation. So those who remain in tukdam for a few days, that's what they were doing. They are able to recognize that stage, and they were able to seize that moment. That's why they remain in that meditative state for days. So that's what I wanted to add on to that. And then coming to the question of how do we live well? So I think there is 2 elements. First is to realizing the dependent nature of things. So as Dr. Tenzin Namdul mentioned earlier, that we are interconnected and everything is dependent on some things. So in Buddhist, we call it cause and effect. So that is one thing that we have to gain insight into. Not only just understand at the intellectual level, but really gain this conviction that if I want to be treated nicely, I have to treat them nicely. If I want strawberries, I want to plant strawberry seeds, not chili seeds. If you plant chili seeds, chili will come out, sprout, not the strawberry. So that is important. With that, what happens is when you have that view, then naturally there is this chance of this attitude of non-harming others, the conduct of non-violence, the conduct of non-harming. Of course, if you are able to help others, that's best. But if you have this understanding of interdependent nature, then at least we will be more mindful of causing harm. So if you are able to avoid harm, let's say even just using harsh words to others, your life is already a different life. You will have more friends, you have less trouble, you have less suffering, you have less stress, and that all add up at the time of death, it would be a peaceful.
Thank you. Thank you. A related question then, Dr. Namdul, is what is the benefit of keeping this focused mind just at the time of death? Does yours work?
I think this works, right? Thank you for for holding on to the same thread. And I think as Rinpoche alluded to earlier, that the extremely subtle consciousness at the last stage of dying, that's really the most powerful state of mind. Because it's that time that our cognitive or our state of mind is completely undivided. It's being able to just stay completely focused. And I've spoken to many Tibetan Buddhist scholars in different stages of their practice. And most of them would tell me that that's the time when even being able to, as Rinpoche said earlier, being able to stay in that meditative state for a few minutes would be equivalent to their numerous lives that they might have had before, and including this lifetime. And so for them really being able to, I think there's a spectrum of state of our consciousness, right? And so here, for the sake of our engagement in conversation, we are having a gross and subtle and extremely subtle and then extremely subtle consciousness. But there's this different kind of a spectrum of state of our consciousness. And for instance, sometimes we will feel that, right? If we are in a library or in a coffee shop, somewhere we're just enjoying our drinks, coffee, and reading our book, and we get few times we get into a state of mind where we're just zoned in. Like the things like someone like Kobe Bryant would say, right? When he's zoned in, and during the play of time, they're just able to just kind of take away all the distractions, and the only thing they see is the hood, and then they make the basket. And so for these practitioners, really is there kind of a ultimate goal that they be able to stay in their mind. And it's only at the 8th stage of the dying that really it can sprout out. And the really beautiful analogy that Rinpoche made earlier was like, whatever you sow, so shall you reap. And it's the whole lifetime of investing yourself in such practice can really help you to take you through that trajectory of going from that gross to subtle to extremely subtle consciousness. And when you get to the 8th stage of dying, Chiba Yosel, and a practitioner would seize that moment and then continue the meditation. And in recent years, one of the practitioners, he stayed in tukdam for 37 days. And it was right in the middle of pandemic at Gyuto Monastery up in northern India in Dharamsala. And it can't cease to amaze you. You just don't have words to describe that kind of a cultural practices or phenomenon. And that's where they're able to stay in that state of extreme self-consciousness, to continue to investigate the ultimate reality, which Rinpoche earlier said is the state of being in complete sync with interdependent nature. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for that. In the spirit of being prepared, and as a person is facing death, Rinpoche, I'm wondering, often in Western medicine, there's a hesitancy to tell a dying person that in fact they are dying. I would imagine that's not true in this case because it thwarts the opportunity for preparation. But could you talk to us a little bit about that and maybe the do's and don'ts of dying well?
That's a very good question. And I have experienced some of these dilemmas. On the one hand, we say that the patients or whoever is dying need to prepare. And then on the other hand, you encounter patients who are already facing the end of life, but they are clueless of the severity of their illness. And the danger here is, if they are unaware of their situation, they will not prepare. They would not prepare for the next life. They will not prepare for living. They will be still hoping to be recovered. So we lose that precious time. And I always tell Tibetan people that if you have somebody who is facing end of life, you must invite some monks or somebody to give some instructions to help them, so that whatever remaining time they have, at least they can prepare. But most of the time, in my case, when I'm called, either the patient is already unable to understand a word, because what happens is they don't want to let the patient know. They try to hide this. And then when there's sign of dying, then they will call. Frantically, they panic and they call. So when we go there, the only thing we can do is to recite some prayers. We are unable to offer some instructions. So that's in my view, it has been more beneficial to tell the patient. Of course, when my father was diagnosed with cancer, I met with this dilemma, this challenge, whether to tell him. On the one hand, you think that telling them will kind of discourage them, make them feel hopeless, because people have this notion that cancer equals cancel. So they feel so hopeless. And then people feel that, oh, maybe, whatever treatment available may not respond. Person may not respond to the treatment because there's no, the hope has become already hopeless. But I think that depends on the situation. If the doctor has clearly mentioned that it's only a matter of weeks or months, then I think it is important to have a discussion. That's why I think, to your next question, to elaborate on that one, the dying well, we have something called, in the text, we have something called 5 powers. So one of them is what we call the white seed power, power of white seed, which means it's really preparing, it's completing what is known as the unfinished business. So if you need to prepare your will, or you need to do anything while you can, finish all this unfinished business. That's one thing. And I think the most important thing is to have this intention, repeated intention, generate this intention that when the time comes, I will cultivate virtuous mind. Because if you don't have this strong intention when you are conscious, over here the practice is to give morphine, to give painkiller. Towards the later stage, stronger painkillers were given, and then the patient is like zombie. It's like you wonder whether they can even understand, whether they feel anything. So in such cases, if one is able to have this intention that I will maintain a positive state of mind at the time of death, because of that power of having that intention when you were conscious, it kind of brings the effect lasts. And then when it really happens, you are able to do that. So one of the 5 power is to have that intention. And then not only having that intention, while you can, one has to repeatedly engage in that practice, so that that becomes part of your second nature, or you become more familiar, so that it's easier to come.
Thank you. I have one final question, maybe for both of you, and that is, so much of your answer was about sort of self-preparation, of course, but as family members, what can we do to help a dying person achieve a calm mind and be prepared?
So this is purely from the Buddhist perspective. So we believe that all this attachment, anger, are not good for the dying people. So in the Western culture, you bring things that they like. The family members will gather, hold hand, all this. So from our perspective, we say that these can become obstacles. Because imagine just before the person is dying, if you bring somebody the person is so attached to, and then the last image that the dying person will have that image and then associated attachment. So from the Buddhist point of view, attachment is not good. Of course, anger at the time of death, if you say something to cause the person to get angry or upset, that's also not good, as I explained before. So the most important thing is to try to have the person calm, if possible, to generate positive mindset. So it doesn't have to be a Buddhist. Whatever faith you believe in, if you're able to recite prayers. So that's why Tibetans, when somebody is dying, we always show His Holiness the Dalai Lama's picture. We always tell them to think of His Holiness. What happens is Tibetan people have generally such a strong faith and reverence to His Holiness. So just the mere picture can invoke such a strong, virtuous mind. So that's why you say that, look here, this is His Holiness, please, try to think of Him. So that's why it is good to create that kind of environment, calm environment, virtuous environment. And after somebody passes away, our practice is not to touch the person. As Dr. Tenzin Namdul mentioned about these 8 stages. So clinical death happens at the 4th stage. So the doctors will pronounce that, okay, person is dead. But from the Buddhist perspective, the person is not dead yet. It is dying. As long as the consciousness remains in the body, the person is not dead. The moment consciousness leaves, then we say the person is dead. So sometimes what happens is, if a person is a practitioner, maybe the person is going through these stages, recognizing these various stages and trying to meditate, and then you are, moving the body, and it's a disturbance, it's a distraction. And if for any case, let's say a person dies in a hospital, you don't have the luxury to keep the body untouched and unmoved. You have to move at some stage. So at that time, we normally say that always start with a holy image, a holy statue, or even a holy text, and touch the body's crown. Because that represents leaving the consciousness from the crown of the head, which has some significance of person being born in a higher rank. And I think that's about it. And Dr. Tenzin Namdul can add more.
I'll just quickly add a few things here, just kind of piggybacking on what Rinpoche was saying. I think there are a few key components that I've observed doing my work in Tibetan community was, I think the Tibetan culture seems to have much richer language when we deal with death and dying, when we care for dying people. I mean, one of the things that Rinpoche was just alluding to in terms of someone is dead or alive is contingent upon our mind. In Tibetan term, we call every sentient being Semjin. Semjin means one who has consciousness. Sem is mind, and Jin means the one who has that. And so in some ways, it's quite literally, you can directly translate that. And so, I mean, in modern biomedicine, we have all this dilemma about whether someone is dead or not yet dead, or do we need to hasten the death, or do we need to prolong the life? We also use in the Western medicine saving someone, saving devices. I mean, it's really hard to save someone. We can prolong someone's life, right? And so therefore, I think the richness of language, what we have realized in the Western biomedicine or capitalist model of medicine is we have really poverty of language that we are realizing it so strongly. People like Gawande and others who have worked on that have expressed it quite explicitly in their literature. So there are plethora of literature out there in the Western biomedicine. What is lacking? The other thing that's really interesting is when I was doing my ethnographic work, I was really looking at the role of 3 key role players or key stakeholders. So I was looking at when the doctors are coming in, when the spiritual teachers are coming in, when the family members are coming in. And so interesting in this Tibetan settlements in southern India, often I would see that these key stakeholders, they take their turn to be in the front, to be in the background, to be in the side, sometimes collaborating together. And at different stages of dying, that happens, and which is not something that happens so frequently in the West, and which I also alluded to earlier. And I think, so these are the key things that we really need to focus on, how we can have a not only richer language, but also language that can speak to different people with different cultural background, people with different, if you go into detail, different predisposition of nature. So I think those are the things that certainly which are out there that we can continue to work on.
No, thank you. I think we should open the floor up for questions. Again, please wait for the mic to arrive.
I'm a retired physician, and I've been at a lot of deaths. And it seems to me that the practitioner and the person, it's a one-to-one situation. And like you said, that families can be really distracted because they have not reached that level of understanding and can be very disrupted and want you to do everything so that they won't pass. So is usually the relationship between the practitioner and the patient and the family really aren't involved all at the same time, that maybe they have a turn, but they have been given instructions on the process, and so they have a more understanding of it?
Yeah, I think it is, that's why I see in Tibetan community that especially with the younger generation, so they are clueless of what to do at the time of death and what to do after somebody dies. So that's why they really don't know when. I won't give any specific examples, but just to say that I think it is important to be educated. Education is important for the family members to know what to do and what not to do. So at the time of death, you can gather around. Instead of crying and showing sadness and all these things, if you can help them recite some prayers. So for the Tibetan people, it is very easy, but I don't know about others. For Tibetan, many of them can recite prayers, so they can even tell them to think of His Holiness Dalai Lama. So that's very easy for the Tibetan peoples to do. But for the other tradition, I don't know. But of course, if you subscribe to a particular faith, it is good to have somebody from your faith, a priest or somebody, to come and do prayers, especially at the time of death. That would be beneficial. But from the family side, try not to create that anxiety, because person is already feeling anxiety, anxious, and then all that noise and all that, that doesn't help. That creates more anxiety.
Yeah, I would just quickly say, I'll just quickly add on to her question and then please after that. But thank you for asking that question. This is really key, how we can actually work with family members, right? And I think there are few literature out there where I think the awareness of dying, I forget the name of authors, but they look at how family members work with caregivers in hospital settings in the West. And again, kind of for extrapolating on what I have observed and collected data from the field work and how we can translate that into Western culture is really about, if not more, we should give equal importance to a person's state of being. By kind of a default of what we have done in Western biomedicine, where technologically the advancement is exponential, right? I mean, there's so much advance and it has saved so many people who could have died. But the flip side is sometimes we use the same kind of a model or method to prolonging someone's life, and the emphasis is so much on physical preservation. And so we really, I think, when as things are getting to a point where there isn't really much chance of, especially when organs are failing one after another, right? And it's important that, okay, now we should focus on, of course, making a person comfortable, palliative care, pain kind of a management, but at the same time, giving enough space and resources that the person's state of mind is at peace and calm and relaxed. And I think that I've seen over and over again in that community I studied in Tibetan settlement. So that's something that we can definitely try to co-opt into what we already have in the Western medical system. Thank you.
You've been talking, obviously, about the 8 stages of death, and particularly the 4 pillars of strength for dying well. It seems like it's such an emphasis on the focused mind and meditation. I just wondered what your view is on helping people to die well that they're dying of Alzheimer's or severe dementia. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this is another very important question. And I think that's why, so maybe I can share one of our ongoing projects right now is looking at the Alzheimer's and related dementias in the same community that I did my dissertation work and follow-up research. And one thing that I showed earlier was on slide was really trying to engage in certain practices that will help to strengthen your cognitive and physical resiliency. And so things should start as early as possible, right? And so from the very early age, just like, we would engage in physical exercise, so that when we get to a stage when we started to lose our muscle fiber, when we start to get weak in terms of physically, but if we have done enough physical exercise, when we get into 70s and 80s, we have enough strength that we are less vulnerable to fall and have fracture or so on and forth. Same goes with the cognitive resiliency or cognitive function. And so these practitioners that I have studied, they were able to really stay sharp and focused, irrespective of what kind of a physical, biological conditions they are in, and dying process is one of them. And then now we bring in, at a certain stage, when we started to lose our many neurons in our brain, right? And we started to lose those neurotransmitters that can actually help to talk to each other. And what we have seen is majority of this monastic community, they have all the metabolic disorders. That could be the right recipe for someone to develop Alzheimer's and dementia. There are substantial number of diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, cardiovascular disorders. But then we haven't found anyone, let alone Alzheimer's disease, we haven't found anyone with mild cognitive impairment. So I think preventive measure is certainly there, engaging contemplative practice, having that kind of a clear thought, clarity is just so critical. But even when someone is experiencing, even when someone is having a dementia, we can always catch that window of time where someone would just gain the sense of clarity. Like when you sit with someone with dementia or Alzheimer's disease or any form of dementia, we would see that all of a sudden the person will start talking and making sense. That's when we can introduce one or other form of mild cognitive contemplative practice or a meditative practice, and that will certainly help. And so at the end of the day, it's really when someone get to the advanced stage of Alzheimer's disease or related dementias, the body's memory also started to fail, right? The body's memory to breathe will cease to breathe. The body's memory to, like, our autonomic nervous system started to fall apart. And that's when really the cognitive muscle, if you will be able to come in. And that cognitive muscle is already kind of installed in the subconscious level of our physical state. So when we talk about breathing difficulties, it will be less for those advanced Alzheimer's disease. Otherwise, sometimes they might choke themselves on death, but they would have less chance. So it's an ongoing study. Unfortunately, the study has to be paused due to current administration, but we hope that we'll continue to have that larger study and have something to share with our community in near future. Thank you.
I wanted to thank Mia and Rinpoche and Doctor that you're here today. This has been fabulous for me. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic cancer. Doctors thought I'd had about 1.5 years. So I am here. I think I'm pretty alive. And I wanted to thank the woman that asked that question. That was a question I was going to ask. But I have another question to ask you all. And that is, it's not something that was brought up in this lecture today, but it's something that every time I come across this, and I wanted to say that shortly after I was diagnosed, I had a God moment. A voice said, "You are not prepared for death." And that put me on a journey of, with this incredible Hennepin County library system, of looking at all sorts of books around death, and brought me to Tibetan Buddhism because it was the most logical. My question is, I've read several times about I think it's called the winds of karma after the death of this body, and how they sweep you away, and you really don't have a choice of what your next rebirth is, and where you're going to be. And I'm hoping I go to the pure blissful land of Sukhavati, to use a Sanskrit terminology for that. So if you could, I think it relates to what we're talking about today, but the winds of karma.
So this is really the framework of Buddhism. So Buddhism subscribes to this, the concept of karma, we call law of causality. So karma literally means action. So in our life, this life, past life, we engage on a variety of activities. From morning to night, we engage in so many types of actions. So some are negative, some are positive, so such as being kind, helping others, telling the truth. All these are considered positive. And then there are certain actions. There are physical actions that can be negative, and also mental, mostly mental. Anger is a very common thing. For many people, like one day we get angry, I don't know how many times. So these are considered negative actions. So our rebirth, our life, from the Buddhist point of view, determines by your action, your karma. If you do good, result will be good rebirth. So we don't have freedom in that sense. But of course, we have freedom, we have independence to choose what cause to create. If we want a good rebirth or a favorable rebirth, we have to cultivate the causes that corresponds to that positive result. If we don't want to experience unfavorable rebirth, then we have to prevent or stop committing those karmas or causes and conditions that give rise to unfavorable conditions or existence. So that's the meaning. On the one hand, you are your own savior because you can choose what to do. As long as you do that, nobody can force you. If you have been doing all the positive karmas, there is no way that you will be experience something negative. That's the law of causality. So if you have created the condition to experience something unpleasant, then the force, the wind or whatever you call that, it is completely on that karma. You have no choice, even though you want to experience something else, but you don't have because you have already created that. And also from the Buddhist perspective, one good thing is that there's no such thing as destiny. So now that I have created this karma, I must experience the result. There's something called purification. You can exhaust, you can purify that negative karma so that you don't have to experience the result or the consequences. So I hope I have answered the question.
I would just to add that I'm glad that you are here with us, and I'm sure you have accumulated enough good karma and merit in your past life to be able to transcend your physical illness, and by that I'm sure you are already working on creating a good karma for your next life, if you will. So congratulations for that. Thank you.
I think we've reached the end. Oh, one more question here.
Hello, and thank you. I'm intrigued by the contemplation phase after the death or in the dying process. And we've been talking about only people who are experiencing slow illness deaths. What about, how do those principles, if they do, translate to people who experience quick or unexpected deaths from car accidents or natural disasters or homicides, things like that? Just welcome your thoughts on that. Thank you.
So that's a very good question. Thank you. We talk about these stages, 8 stages of dissolution. For those people who have a certain death, so there is no kind of a slow sequence of all this. So it may be one to quickly jump to the 8. So in such situation, it is very unfortunate to really seize that moment because it is very difficult. But then, it ties back to living well. So if one has led a good life, so no matter whether it's certain death, of course, if you have slow death, you have more time to prepare. But as long as you have lived a good life, ethical life, then I think that contributes, that helps in your death. And then as I mentioned before about this, having this intention that, any moment that can happen, at the time of when the death happens, may I be able to, or I will engender, or I will invoke, or I will bring to my mind, virtuous mind. So that one is very important because that effect will last, even if you are to die in such condition.
I would like to add a few things here because I had a personal experience as you asked this really important question, because we usually, and this is one of the most common questions that we would receive, like what would happen if someone died on a plane crash or in a car accident, or someone would just die in their sleep, right? So I remember when I was working on my dissertation work, there were a group of university students from Atlanta, from Emory University, came to southern India, and they were assigned to me to work on their group project on death and dying, and they asked many questions. So one question was, what do you have learned being here at the monastery for all these months? And I remember thinking about the personal experience I had. And so some of you know this story. In 2016, July 24th, 3:47 p.m., I had a really bad car accident on 94 East. And I was almost driving 70 miles, and the way the accident happened, it's almost same as some of those Fast and Furious movie scenes coming out of the screen. There were like 16, 18 cars involved, and I ended up, this other big SUV car lost control and came out of the other side of the highway, and then start getting spun, and then flew in the sky, and then just landed on the front of my car, and I had to maneuver. And then I went to the median. There's a little gorge, and I went in and spun, and my car just flew in the sky, and then went into the semi trunk. And it happened in a few seconds, right? But there was so much happening. But I'm not a good practitioner, but I've heard a lot and I've read a lot for my graduate work. As most of you know, in graduate PhD work, okay, first thing before you do anything is you need to defend your prospectus, right? So you need to just dive in and read everything. And then I already had done first phase of my work, and so I had a chance to talk to all these practitioners. And the effect of reading, getting exposed to all those all those practitioners inside, was within that 5-6 seconds, it gave me ample time to think about how I want to die. I was right there, and I was telling myself, okay, I need to stay focused and I need to try to get through the stages of dying. And so then I hit the trunk, and it split into two. There was, oh my God, there's some physics going on. I'm not too good in explaining the physicality, the mechanism of physics there. But then it pushed my car back and landed on the opposite highway. And then there was this 12 or 13 cars just started banging on my car. And my car was just completely totaled. But I stepped out of the car without any injury. I had a small cut on my shrine. Someone by the name of gentleman, Mr. Michael Ormond, came to rescue me on the highway. And so that really helped me to just kind of stay focused and having that time to introspect of what I have heard and learned, and then contemplate on how I want things to be. And so there's a really both the kind of the hindsight and the perspective, retrospective, prospective, bringing them to the present and trying to work on my own options of dying. And so I haven't really shared that with many of the people, but I think thank you for asking that very apt question, how actually we can apply that what we have learned and heard when things like that happen. So I think thank you. And I'm still here, just like our friend here.
The book will be available if you so like, and Professor Namdul and Professor Cameron will be here to sign copies if you'd like. So thank you so much for attending. You can come back to see us. Thank you.